What's up, guys? My name is Ace, and just in case you guys haven't noticed yet, Safeguard is here in Black Ops 4. This is something that I honestly expected to come at some point, but I was quite surprised to see that it just suddenly appeared, and it is here, and it is a ton of fun. I'm having a blast with it, at least. But today, I'm going to be bringing in a bunch of tips for you guys to help you dominate Safeguard for both offense as well as defense. First up, let's start off with the offense side where you're escorting the robot. This side is a little bit more straightforward. There's a lot more going on defense, like how to destroy the robot faster, so we will get into that towards the end of the video. But to start it off, let's go over the tips I have if you're on the team that has to escort the robot to the other team's base. For specialists, when I'm on the escorting side, I typically prefer using either Seraph, mainly for the TAC deploy beacon, so I can continually push my team upwards on the map to help them gain that map control, and map control is very important in this mode. Or I like using Torque, and Torque is excellent just for cutting off lanes so that you can cut off any sort of a flank route that the enemies might have on you, or if there's a choke point that's somewhere ahead of where your robot has to go in the future, you can push up past the robot and cut off that choke point so enemies can't get to your robot, and that just helps your team out so much when you're trying to push that robot forward. Of course, when you're on the escorting side, things are really opened up and there's a lot of freedom, so therefore you really can use any specialist you want. I just feel that Seraph and Torque are going to be the most vital to the team's success when you're trying to win the game. Now, as for the actual gameplay of escorting that robot, the first big tip I have for you guys that I see a lot of people either they just don't understand it or they ignore it completely. You only need one person escorting the robot. The robot doesn't move any faster if you have multiple people escorting it. And if everybody on your team is grouping up on the robot, that's pretty dangerous. All it takes is one cluster grenade or one person just spraying with an LMG to potentially take your entire team out, which will really set you guys back. As a result, typically, if I see an enemy that's escorting the robot, I do everything in my power to support him escorting that robot, rather than just standing next to him and also being a really easy target. You're much better off at that point pushing past the robot, which brings us to the next tip. This is creating buffer zones around the path of the robot. So again, this assumes that somebody is already trying to escort that robot. Of course, if nobody else on your team is escorting, somebody's got to do it. So make sure you hop on and do that. You will get some score for doing it, which is nice. But assuming you have a teammate that's actively trying to escort the robot, the best thing you can do for them is push past the robot for map control and get your kills. Just slay the enemies and try and make it so the enemies don't even get a line of sight on the robot in the first place. Because if you can do that, then it's going to be a much easier escort for your team. Now keep in mind, of course, there is a very big difference between creating a buffer zone and going off into some random area of the map just to get your kills and slay. Slaying is very important when you're on the escorting side. However, you want to make sure that you're getting objectively significant kills. You want to make sure that you're actually getting kills that protect the people that are escorting on your team. Now, of course, sometimes if the enemies have a really good defense setup and they're just stopping that robot in its tracks consistently, flanking into a lesser used lane is okay in these situations in order to try and break that setup and kill those enemies that are consistently shutting your team down. Just don't fall into that trap of consistently staying away from the path of the robot and just going for kills, because you're really not doing much to help your team in those situations. When it comes to class setups when you're on the escorting side, it's really open to whatever you're comfortable with. It's based on map design, it's based on your preferences and playstyle. Honestly, there isn't like a best escorting class in my opinion. Use what you're comfortable with and just make sure that you're slaying your enemies. Slaying is extremely important as long as it's objectively significant. And always be working to either escort that robot or support your teammates that are escorting that robot. So that's it for the escorting side. Like I said, it's fairly straightforward and simple. Now let's move on to defense. When you're trying to stop that robot and stop them from escorting it to your base, there's quite a bit going on with defense, so let's start getting into it. For specialists, I really like using Torque once again, just like with the offense side, because with this, I can use the barricade and the razor wire to shut down lanes ahead of the robot, which is much easier to do on defense. And this is excellent for cutting off those choke points and really slowing the enemies down as they go through certain choke points, because that barricade will completely shut down the path. You know exactly the path that the robot's going to take if you have some experience with Safeguard, which you will gain over time. So you can get that barricade set up in advance in an area that will at least slow your enemies down in getting through that area. And also the barricade does hurt the robot a decent amount. It doesn't like instantly destroy it, but it definitely helps in slowing down that robot. In addition to Torque, Battery is a great choice just because you can spam those cluster grenades towards the robot or the general area around the robot to kill anybody that's escorting, and the cluster grenades do a fair amount of damage to the robot at the same time. And also War Machine. War Machine is excellent for finishing off the robot. You can take it out extremely quickly with a few War Machine shots. Firebreak is also an excellent choice on defense, partially because the reactor core is great, because oftentimes you get those teams where people just pile on the robot instead of just leaving one person to escort. And if you can get within range with your reactor core, like on the other side of a wall or something, you can often get yourself a triple or a quad feed really, really easily. And also, of course, that slows their progress down quite a bit as you're using your reactor core. And those charge relatively often in a game, so you can use them several times. And in addition to that, the Purifier is great for clearing off the robot, and it's also great for killing the robot, but we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. Now, a couple more specialists I like on defense. First up, Nomad. There's going to be a little trick I show you towards the end of the video as to why I like using Nomad quite a bit for Safeguard. But also we have Prophet, and the main key with Prophet here is with the Tempest, if you shoot an enemy player, they will go down, and then for a certain period of time, it will chain to anybody that comes near him. What this means is if you shoot one person that's escorting that robot, none of his teammates can get near that robot until that player is either dead, or if they aren't very smart, they'll just run in there and they'll give you free kills by getting chained to with the Tempest. One thing to point out with the Tempest though is it's terrible for actually destroying the robot, so don't waste your Tempest shots on the robot itself. Just focus on killing the enemies near the robot with the Tempest, and that will slow them down significantly because they won't be able to go near it. So those are my preferred specialists. Of course, once again, feel free to use other things. These are just the ones that I feel will help the team out the most. As for playstyle, I honestly feel a more hard defense approach is typically the best in Safeguard. Make sure you're setting yourself up somewhere within the path of that robot, and just do everything in your power to continue killing any enemies that get near the robot, as well as shut the robot itself down. Now, once again, just like with escorting, if you get the opportunity, it can be helpful on defense to push past the robot a little bit and create that buffer zone so that the enemies don't even have the opportunity to touch the robot. This one is really dependent on the situation, and a lot of times it's not going to be a practical thing to do. You're not going to be able to get that map control effectively, and that's fine. But if you can manage to pull it off, you're going to have a very easy win for that round. Now, one key with this hard defense approach that a lot of people seem to miss is you really want to focus your energy on shutting that robot down within choke points. Now, choke points are going to be any points on the map where enemies and the robot are going to be funneled into a very small area, a very tight quarters area. This is often going to be doorways or just really any part of the pathway that the robot is taking that narrows quite a bit. This is where you want to focus on shutting that robot down, even if it means holding off for a few seconds and letting them escort that robot another 10 feet or something to get to the choke point. It's much better getting yourself set up and ready to challenge them within the choke point than it would be for you to panic and rush around that corner trying to stop them before the choke point, and then likely getting yourself killed because you will be the one in the choke point. This is a mistake I often see people making, is they just go full-on tunnel vision running towards that robot. And it's often a very inefficient approach because you end up getting yourself killed a lot more often, and then you're spending more of your time running from spawn trying to get back in the action. Now, one final playstyle related tip that I have for you guys is destroy that robot whenever you get the opportunity, or shut it down. I guess you don't fully destroy it, but you know what I mean. You shut it down so that it takes a knee and it has to sit there and recharge for a while. The more often you're able to do this on defense, the better off you are. Now, of course, you do want to be somewhat careful about this. You don't want to just completely focus all your attention on that if that means you're going to be a super easy kill for the enemy players. But in any situation where you feel like you can comfortably put some damage into that robot, do it. Even if you already have teammates that are trying to shoot the robot as well and trying to take it out, give them a hand. Get that thing destroyed as quickly as possible and as often as possible. Because every time you do that, you shut it down for 15 seconds, which can really slow them down if you do this several times in a match. Now, as for doing this most effectively, this brings us to the final section of the video where I'm going to be going over all of the things I managed to test, keeping in mind we don't have access to custom games with Safeguard just yet. So unfortunately, I had to do all this testing in public matches, so I don't have all of the perfect data. It's more so I just tried a bunch of things and I'm going to share my experiences with those things. First thing I tested, obviously, is the launcher. The launcher is probably one of your best bets if you're trying to take out the robot by yourself from full health. I think the launcher is your best bet as far as class items and not specialist items. Now, of course, I tested the high explosive attachment on this, wondering if it would do more damage to the Safeguard robots, and no, it does not. So you're actually much better off if you are going to be running an attachment on your launcher, which I would recommend for Safeguard, actually. I would go with the fast loader attachment because you don't necessarily need to lock onto the robot, especially if you're up close. You just want to make sure you're getting those direct hits, and you want to get those rockets off as fast as possible. The next thing I tested was the FMJ2 attachment. Since it deals more damage to score streaks, I thought, hey, maybe it'll also deal more damage to the robot. Based on my experience, again, this is not detailed hand testing. I just tried to take the robot out with the Titan without FMJ2 and then with FMJ2, and then I looked at it in my editing software. It appears that FMJ2 doesn't allow you to deal more damage to the Safeguard robot, so don't bother with FMJ2. It doesn't appear to be helping you against the robot. I also wanted to test headshots because I believe in Black Ops 3, headshots actually did help against the robot, but once again, based on my testing in public matches, it seemed like headshots weren't worth it. I don't know if they were really helping. I know they weren't helping enough for it to be noticeable, and therefore I wouldn't bother wasting your time on those headshots. As for score streaks, the dart can be somewhat nice because it is a super low streak, so you can earn it fairly reliably, and it will take a half-decent chunk out of the robot. It won't destroy it from full health, though. But by far, the better streaks, if you want to play on defense and you want to take that robot out quickly, are going to be the Hellstorm as well as the Lightning Strike. These will allow you to pretty much instantly take the robot as well as any enemies surrounding the robot out. Now, as for the specialists, a couple things I wanted to point out here. First up, the Purifier is surprisingly good at taking out the robot. It really does a lot of damage very quickly, and it's also quite effective for taking any enemies out that are near the robot. The Tempest is surprisingly terrible for taking the robot out, like I said earlier. Focus on shooting the enemies around it, but don't bother wasting your Tempest shots on the robot itself. The Barricade is somewhat effective. It's mainly effective for cutting off choke points and stopping the robot in its tracks and preventing enemies from going near the robot when it's being irradiated. But it also will deal some damage to the robot, and it will eventually take it out. Razor Wire does absolutely nothing against the robot. He'll just walk right through it as if it doesn't exist. The Annihilator is pretty decent at taking out the robot. I don't know if you want to waste your Annihilator just to take the robot out once, but you absolutely can do that if you want. Same thing goes with the War Machine. Very, very effective for destroying the robot, but you might not want to waste all your shots just to do that once. Ruin's Gravity Slam is good at taking out the robot. However, it is sort of a one and done sort of thing, and therefore I typically stay away from Ruin's Gravity Slam on this. And quite surprisingly with Nomad, the dog does a half-decent amount of damage to the robot. It will attack it. However, it does kind of get tunnel vision on the robot, and therefore any enemies that come near will be able to take your dog out very, very easily. But this leaves us with possibly the biggest surprise out of the specialists. Nomad's Mesh Mine is very effective at taking out the robot, and not in the way that you might think. You don't want to be using the Mesh Mine to set up a trap in a doorway for the robot. It really doesn't do much in that situation. However, if you just shoot your Mesh Mine projectiles directly at the robot, it will take a big chunk of damage out, especially considering the fact that you get 2 every time you charge it. So Nomad is surprisingly good on defense for Safeguard. Now, another thing I tested thinking maybe we would see some crazy results like we saw with the Strike Team was the Combat Axe. And it turns out the Combat Axe does take a half-decent chunk out of the robot, but it's probably not going to be your best option. So finally, I just wanted to quickly share an excellent class setup. If you're just trying to shut that robot down and play really hard defense, this is the class setup I'd recommend. Although you can swap the Titan out for the Hades because the Hades actually deals more damage per second, but you don't get quite the same magazine capacity on that. The keys with this though are going to be the launcher with both rocket cache as well as the fast loader attachment. This allows you to destroy that robot consistently many times in a row. And equipment charge is also quite important here because this allows us to charge up our specialist ability, which is going to help a lot in Safeguard. As for the perks, you can pretty much use whatever you want here, but I personally lean towards Engineer, Gung Ho, and Dead Silence. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for all of the main tips that I have for you guys to help you dominate Safeguard. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what is your best tip for the Safeguard game mode? Maybe something that I didn't catch in this video. Let me know if you have any extra tips in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.